And now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Greg George is a governmental affairs associate with Americans for Prosperity here in Michigan. Greg graduated from Hillsdale College, a fine conservative place of learning. That's good, absolutely. With a degree in finance and from Western Michigan University with a master's in business administration. At Americans for Prosperity, he researches and tracks legislation that pertains to economic freedom, things like health care, energy, taxes, spending, labor, and education. And then he talks about the importance of economic freedom to groups like ours, all across the state. He also manages the social media and content for their website, which is michiganafp.com. And tonight he's going to talk about two real important issues, the Medicare expansion and the Michigan road tax. So please join with me to welcome Greg tonight to our podium.
Acceptable to sit up here? All right. My uncle's a pastor, but I've never been on the podium before myself. So. All right. Perfect. Can you hit the bottom right there, Bill? Great. Yes. All right. I was actually just tweeting. Governor Snyder is online right now. He's on the radio, WWJ, taking questions on Medicaid expansion. So I had to schedule a couple to go on while I'm up here. So I'm multitasking. So hopefully he answers some of them and I see something going on. So if you're following it back home or if you do go on Twitter, you use the hashtag AskGov and you can go back and look through some of the stuff that they were asking. But thank you for having me. There's two major issues going on in Lansing. There's obviously Medicaid expansion, HB 4714, and then there's the road funding one. And I've been doing road talks for the entire month of May. Actually, the last road talk I gave was a month ago today. So we've delayed the tax hikes on that so far. They're on break through the end of the summer, I think till September something. So that's good news. We have time to really beef up and give the offices some calls and let them know. So I want to start off and do road funding first, and then kind of recap a little bit of Medicaid expansion, then just do some Q&A, because I think that's really how you can get some of your questions answered, and hopefully I know them. So, AFP's position on this specifically, sort of when I was going through it, how do you always not sound like the group saying no, 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 right? So that's the trick with Tea Parties and with our group, is we're always saying no, but you don't want to come across as like you hate everybody. So I try to rebrand it a little bit. Just prioritize the spending, don't raise the taxes. So that's essentially what's happening here. Because what is a tax hike for everyone in this room? Well, it's a cut in your budget, right? So when they propose to raise taxes on you, they're proposing to cut your budget and not the state budget, or cutting areas of programs that they like or that helps get them money to get reelected. I'm going to start off, I'll show you kind of how it all started, how the Medicaid, or how the road funding debate got sort of going in Lansing, and then where it is now, so you have an idea of what happened so far. The tax hike that the governor is asking for in 2013, his State of the State, he's asking for a $1.2 to $1.6 billion tax hike to fix the roads. It's not small, right? That's not a little bit amount of money. That's not like, hey, we just need to raise it half of a penny. No, this is insane. $1.4 billion is basically the consensus of what the hike is going to be. So just remember $1.4 billion. So your next question is, well, what is the budget now? What are we spending right now on roads? State budget, state taxes only, $2.1 billion, basically $2.2 billion. That's 64% increase if you were to add the $1.4 billion to that. Let it sink in for a minute. The current budget, if you include federal funds, is $3.4 billion, almost $3.5 billion. And the governor's going around saying, well, if we don't get these tax hikes, we might lose out on federal funding and matching. It's never happened. In the history of Michigan, we've always found a way to match federal funds. So if they use that argument, if your lawmaker uses that excuse, it's hogwash. Now, what's the current status of our roads? They keep saying that if we don't do anything now, they make it out to be like we're in a road apocalypse. It's like you're driving around, your car is going to just blow up the next time it hits a pothole. That's essentially what it is they're talking about. So we're in apocalyptic times with roads. What is our current status? What do we have right now? This is the Michigan Department of Transportation's chart. They put together like a 5-year kind of outlook or forecast. And it shows you, you can see that dotted line is the actual historic numbers of what they rated good or fair of our roads. So back in it starts in 1998, and it goes up to 2020. It started off at 70%. Around 2000, it looks like 7, just before 7, we hit above the 90% threshold. And the 90% threshold is like what they want our roads to be, good or fair, that percent of good or fair. We are right now, currently, if you can see my mouse here, we are right here, just under 97. But we are going into a road apocalypse. We are at basically like 87% roads are in good or fair condition. But the way the governor talks, it's like your car will literally blow up on the road. So this is the chart here, too. It shows if we match all current federal funding, that's the green one, that's sort of the important chart. It's like the reverse hockey stick. Whenever a government bureau or a politician puts together a chart, it always is some sort of hockey stick. You've got your global warming one that goes like this. You've got your road one that goes like this. And this is what happens if we do nothing. This is what current roads are going to come in, and we're just going to fall off the chart. You're going to be walking to work or riding your bike. But let me take you back and show you a previous Michigan Department of Transportation graph that I found on Mackinac Center's website. 2012, we were supposed to be at 74%. We're at 87. And at 2007 is the same time when we hit that 90% number. So just some perspective. Yes, do roads need repaired? Sure they do. Certain ones do more than others. I rode on some pretty nice ones over here. I-69 is not bad. Pretty much the whole way here. A lot of your local roads are bad. I gave a similar talk like this, but we had it with Michigan Department of Transportation was there, and then there was a local county commissioner that was also there. Their third highest expense was retiree costs. So a lot of it is your local road money is automatically getting diverted into like the defined benefit pension plans that are just unsustainable. So a lot of it is there's money there, it's just being spent on things that were promised that they can't afford. So remember that too. So that's a lot of times why highways are actually not too bad in most places, except maybe I-75 in certain spots are pretty bad. But other than that, I've noticed that highways are pretty good. It's the actual local roads that need some work. So in 2013, State of the State, Governor Snyder comes out with his proposal, and they come up with the slogan, just fix the roads, save money, and save lives. Have you seen billboards for this anywhere? I see them in Lansing all the time. I don't know if there's any located over here. The Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, and then there's others that have gotten involved, and behind them is a big lobby group for roads. Specifically, they introduced initially Senate Bills 84 through 88, and then the Joint Resolution J. Those are pretty much dead because they were just not popular. But remember the slogan, save money, save lives. Because remember the chart earlier, how if they spend money, let me go back here. When they say save money, they're talking about if we wait and do nothing and then all of a sudden decide we're going to fix roads in 2017, well, to get to that 90% number, we're going to have to spend a lot more money. Well, that makes sense if the chart's right. But the funny part for me, and it's not really funny, is that they use the save lives jargon. It's like, well, people are dying because we're not fixing the roads. And it's like, well, I know quite a few programs that are killing people then because we're spending money on them and we don't need to be. So I'm going to go, the left does a very good job of making it personal. Well, Snyder helped us out by doing this. So when I get to the part where we can eliminate programs, just remember, every time when you call your lawmaker, we spend money on film subsidies. I just heard Transformers 4 was being filmed over in Lenawee County. How many people died because we are paying to have Hollywood come in and film that? Now, I like movies. I'm a total cinephile, but I don't want to pay twice to go see this film. Option A that Governor Snyder proposed was, in the initial Senate bills that were introduced, was to increase the gas tax and your registration fees, because those are the two things right now that go to the state money. That $2.1 billion, that's essentially what they are, state gas tax and then your vehicle registration taxes. Now, what is it currently? Right now, it's 19 cents a gallon. It's a flat amount. When you go to the pump, You're paying 19 cents every gallon. They wanted to raise it initially, and it depends on the price of gas. So it's anywhere from like 33 to 37 cents a gallon. It depends on the average price, because they want to change it from a flat rate to a percentage of wholesale, which is sort of like one of those sort of ominous numbers. What is the percentage of, what is the wholesale price? Does anyone know what the wholesale price in this room? I don't. No one knows. And that's part of the point, and I'll explain that in a second too. They want to raise it, so 33 to 37 cents, so you're essentially adding nearly 20 cents a gallon of just taxes for state. They also are saying, but don't worry, they're looking out for you. This is another thing they tried to say is, well, we've capped it, 1 cent per year, can't go up higher than that. And it's at a maximum of 50 cents. And they've also permanently made that law forever the same, right? No, they can't do that. So future lawmakers can come in and they can raise the cap, the total cap. They can raise the per year cap if it's not enough. So it's just a total ruse to say that this is going to protect us from huge increases in taxes. It's a joke, especially if we're in a road apocalypse. The other was to increase the registration fees, which account for basically the other half of that $2.1 billion. And they were wanting to raise it anywhere between 60 to 80, depending on your car, depending on how many you have, the type of vehicle, and on and on and on. And instead of it reducing to the 72.9%, it was going to reduce none for 10 years and then cut in half after that. So it's a big tax hike every year. A family has a couple cars, and you're spending an extra, say, $150 to $200 probably, depending on the list price. So if none of you liked that option, which I would bet no one in this room does, don't worry. They have option B, and you're going to get to pick, because I actually had a state senator tell me this. He's like, well, we're not voting to increase taxes. We're going to give you that option. I was like, that's awful. It's an awful idea. I pay you to go to Lansing, not for me to vote on my own increases in taxes. So the next option was to increase the sales tax. Right now we actually pay a sales tax on gas. We're one of, I think, 8 or 9 states that taxes sales tax on gas. And what that sales tax does is it gives us the 4th or 5th highest, depending on what month it is, highest total taxes on gas in the country. So Michigan already is the 5th highest, the last I checked, on April, I think as of May 1st, it was the highest or something like that. So I need to go back and check June's as soon as it comes out. In the next probably week, they'll have an update. Maybe we'll move up. Who knows? We can be the leader in total taxes again. But essentially, what would happen if option A took place, we'd have the highest taxes in the country immediately. Immediately. It would bump up enough cents to move us above California, Hawaii, New York. Amazing states for economic freedom, right? Increasing the sales tax would move it from 6 to 8. And in order to do that, you would have to vote on this. So you would go in like November. They originally wanted to do this, I think, back in June. Didn't happen. They wanted to do it, I think, in August. Not going to happen. So it would be like a general election. It would happen, or it would happen in like a November election. You'd go in and you'd go, would you like to scrap all of the new taxes on gas, or would you like to raise the sales tax? So you essentially get to pick between 2 really crappy options. B is by far the worst, because you're taxing not specifically the stuff that you want to provide revenue for. So you're taxing everything that has a sales tax instead of a use tax. Because when you're taxing certain items, you want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to pay for what I'm using. And that's what the gas tax is, essentially. The user pays and the user benefits system. This would scrap that entire option A, and you'd go to a sales tax. That was obviously not popular. People didn't like that. People didn't believe that they weren't actually voting for a tax hike, even though they gave them the option. Other things that happened in between this discussion before it gets to the current stuff is that they wanted to extend sales tax to services. Again, another tax hike, another budget cut for you. And then also being discussed was increasing the 6 mil state education tax. So there were options on the table. They decided, all of them were, let's raise taxes. So what is the current option? Right now, like I said before, you're paying a sales tax on gas, and that's roughly, I think, $900 million of revenue that does not go to roads. The sales tax does not go to roads. if you didn't know that when you paid gas, when you were at the pump. So we have the 4th or 5th highest tax on gasoline with a sales tax, and that revenue is not going to roads. They want to potentially, which would be good, exempt gas tax, the gas from sales tax, and then dedicate that extra money to the roads. Well, it would bring in basically the $1.2 billion that they wanted just by doing that alone. But they also want to still increase the gas taxes to this, what I call their ominous wholesale tax. So instead of going to the pump and going, okay, I'm paying a certain cent every time a gallon pumps in, it's going to be a percentage of the wholesale. And what does that do? What does that really mean? Right away, hardly nothing. You're going to get a somewhat of a tax hike, but you won't really notice because if they exempt gas tax, it won't happen. But what does it do in the future as the prices go up, or as politicians decide that they need to get greener and make the regulations on oil tougher? Well, it makes the wholesale price more expensive. And that would be a constant increase in taxes without you voting on it, because it's the wholesale percentage. So as long as the wholesale price is messed with, it's a de facto tax hike on you. Does that make sense? So that's one reason it's just not transparent. That tax is not transparent, and you're not voting on it when it increases. Another thing to do is they're going to, as the federal government likes to say, you know, they're cutting the budget when they're really never cutting it. It's just cutting an increase. I'm sure lawmakers will say, well, we're not really increasing registration fees by 20%. We're cutting it by 40%. Right? No. They want to also increase the registration costs by 20%, and then they want to also add in different ones for electric vehicles and things like that, which those bills are all being heard in committee right now. There is a portion of the sales tax does go to the general fund. There's been talk about moving that percentage of, it's like $100 million into roads itself, because the general fund money, they can do that. They also would then, what happens though, so where does the sales tax money go is what really the next question is. And the sales tax money goes to education and local government revenue sharing. Those are the big two recipients of that $900 million in revenue. Well, they're not just going to go quietly into the night and say, we lost, the roads are important, but kids aren't. So to fund that, lawmakers are not going to cut money, they're going to raise the sales tax by 1 percentage point. But you'd have to vote on that. What does that do? Well, if you say no to a tax hike, which is sort of likely, unless Michiganders are all for raising taxes on themselves, they would need a backup plan, because you have two really powerful lobbies. You have the education lobby, and then you have the road funding lobby, and then you have the local government municipality lobby, all lobbying for a tax hike to help the kids so their education isn't cut. So essentially what we want to do is show programs that can be eliminated to make up for that money that are a complete waste, and then also save lives at the same time. So what are they? The big ones for AFP, there's sheets out there, and some of you may have picked them up. There are 5 that I listed right off the bat. I'll go through the first 3. Film subsidies is the first one. Every year, we're spending money on Hollywood films or independent films just so we can say they were made here in Michigan. Most of you don't even know they were filmed here. When you watch Transformers, if any of you watch Transformers, I like it, you don't actually know that it was filmed here in Michigan. It's not like it's taking place in Detroit. It's taking place in a studio in Michigan. You don't know that. But because Shia LaBeouf came to Michigan, we feel cooler about ourselves, apparently. That's $40 million a year was spent on, if you see in the top left, we spent $40 million on Disney's Oz movie. How many of you went and watched that movie, the new reboot of The Wizard of Oz? It's always just like me. Like, it's always just me. So I paid twice. And I knew going in that we had subsidized it, so I asked if I could go for free. It didn't happen. So I paid twice, saw it one time, but people died, right? Because the governor's saying people are dying every year because we have potholes and there's accidents caused from them. So the big one this year for us is, even though it's only $50 million, we should be able to eliminate film subsidies first. And it is unacceptable if the governor and lawmakers don't get rid of that first before they cut your budget. because that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying that your budget is not as important as the Hollywood film subsidies are to the Michigan's economy. So they're picking which people make the money and who gets it, and you have no choice in the matter. The other one is the 21st Century Jobs Program, and it sort of is part of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is just basically corporate welfare. It's $75 million a year. Film subsidies were $50. 21st Century Jobs is scheduled to be for $75. That's $125 million right there of the $1.2 billion that they're requesting. It hasn't even come up for discussion. And the 21st Century Jobs Program, Democrat, what is his name? Representative Grimmel has said that the funds that they use in that program, the businesses they've been investing in, have just been a failure. You'd think, wow, Republicans should jump on this and say, we should get rid of it, redirect it to something that matters, like roads. No. It's their turn in power, and they get to decide, well, we want to spend it on this business or this business and this business. And a lot of it is your green battery companies, and they promise, we're going to bring in 100,000 jobs to Michigan. They bring in 4. Well, I have a business I'd like to start, and I'll make up a number of people that will come and work for me. Some of them didn't even start. Like, you have to look this. If you go to Mackinac, Mackinac.org, search 21st Century Jobs, I think it's the 3rd link down. It will show you the companies that have invested in, how many jobs were actually created, and it is a joke. So those are 2 big important ones. The other one is the prevailing wage law. In Michigan, there's 2 different things. You have the federal prevailing wage law, which we cannot touch, but there's a state one. So anytime we have a state-funded project for state, like a school building or a road or something, there's going to be this union-mandated wage that has to be paid regardless, and they call that the prevailing wage. If we were to eliminate the state requirements on that, projects could save, and Mackinac Center estimated it conservatively, $107 million a year. Well, that's about a quarter, if you add up just those 3 programs, a quarter of what we need to get up to that $1.2 billion that they're requesting. So what does a prevailing wage do? Well, it's basically government saying that we like this form of worker over this one. Because you can't voluntarily come into a contract and say, I want to work for this particular wage, this is part of the contract. That's what prevailing wage essentially does. So it's not just costs that it saves. It's government picking a winner and loser, just like it does with the 21st Century Jobs Program. There are a bunch of others that are up here. Part-time legislature would be nice. Mackinac Center also has this benefits and balance study. You can see at the top over here. They went through and looked at just what benefits, if they matched public benefits, just benefits, not wages, just the benefits section of public employees to the private sector employees that pay for them, if they matched them evenly, I think it'd save somewhere around $5.4 billion a year. Well, that's a lot of roads and potholes. And that's just their one study. And I think that Michigan legislature has done some of the things, so it might not be the $5 billion, but I'm not thinking they did $4 billion worth of savings. So we're good. They're revamping that. I talked to, I think it was Manny Lopez, who is the editor of Michigan Capital Confidential, if you read that. He said they're redoing it, and then I believe it was Michael Lefebvre, who's their lead policy guy, is also relooking at it. And I think the number is still around $5 billion. We currently also have more non-teaching staff than teaching staff. And the current, another great one that I like to look at is the average public employee compensation, benefits, wages, is over $100,000. So that's where that $5.4 billion comes in, because we have an average public employee making a total compensation over in the 6 figures. So what's more important? It goes back to our entire message, which is prioritize the spending. There is plenty of money there in the nearly $50 billion budget that's being proposed to match up that $1.2 billion in terms of what it is. And is it urgent? Do we need to do it right now? Well, I just showed you that we're at 87% on our roads, according to our own MDOT. And just because it is a crisis doesn't mean we have to just push through bad legislation and make it worse. We've seen that in healthcare debates, healthcare exchanges, Medicaid expansion, cap and trade, not something that AFP does, but immigration. Everything is always a crisis. We have to get it done now so you forget about it and go home and celebrate Independence Day. Senator Colbeck is one of the great sort of free market allies in the Senate. So if you haven't heard of him, should look him up. He actually has other proposals too, and I wanted to highlight them. He has his own plan, so if you do take action, you call in and say, listen, I hear Senator Colbeck has some alternatives to road spending. So you can mention maybe film subsidies and 21st century jobs, and you can also mention Senator Colbeck's plans. He is saying that we have enough money in the general fund, which we do. We actually dedicated, it came in with an extra, I think it was just under the $500 million when I put this together. It was like 460 something. 350 million of that is being dedicated to roads automatically. So that 1.2 billion, the 1.4 billion is already subtracted by about 0.4. Because economic growth in Michigan caused the general fund to grow higher than they expected. So what happens when they do good free market solutions? They reform business taxes, they pass right to work. Businesses want to come here, people stay here. You have taxpayers, you have more in the general fund. That's exactly what happened. We have about $2 billion in roads debt. So the original graph, if you think back, the second one kind of went up and then went straight back down. And the newer one kind of stayed in the 90% range and just barely dropped off. A lot of that is because they sold off a bunch of road debt. They had stimulus money too, but a lot of the stimulus money went to like crazy stuff, like new signs and new things that you just didn't see on the roads, or like a whole new off-ramp that really didn't need to go there. So you have about $2 billion in roads in debt every year. Well, that accounts to about $240 million in just interest on it. And one of Colbeck's plans is to say, let's pay some of that down faster so we don't have to have the interest payments repeatedly all the time. Another thing to worry about too is if they pass the new tax hikes, it allows them to borrow more money. That's part of the bills right there on themselves, because there's more anticipated revenues. What they do is they borrow based on future revenue to fund it now. It's called like front loading. And it allows them to raise that $2 billion number up. So that's another thing to be concerned about. One of my other favorite things that Colbeck has suggested is this. He wants to leverage some of the state assets. The state owns a lot of stuff, and it's not making any money. It just costs a bunch of money. One of his proposals was to allow advertising to take place on these things, at rest areas or on bridges or different things like that, not necessarily on bridges, but on different things so that we can make money on the assets we have voluntarily. That's basically what capitalism is. It's voluntarily exchanging. That was another one of his proposals. And even if it is only $64 million, well, that's $64 million that doesn't come out of your budget. It ranges, though, he estimated anywhere up to about $500 million. Contracts, he wants to change it to be sort of like a design, build, and maintenance contract where you bid on the contract and then you also have to maintain it, which would improve the quality and the life of the road later on, saving a bunch of money as well. So this is me next to one of the billboards, and I want to show you what you're up against because you can see it in pretty much everything you do, and this is why taking action is important. Lobbyists pay for this, to take your money. They'll drive this around Lansing, or they'll drive it around other areas, or they'll pay for huge billboards to go up in key areas where they need votes. And they're going to do this with about every single major issue, including Medicaid expansion. So this is what you're up against. So when you're reading policy papers, which is what I do, so if you go to Mackinac and you read and there's alternative solutions, don't assume your lawmaker knows them just because you now know them. They probably don't. So if you're reading something in Mackinac or you're reading something from Cato or Heritage or something like that, let your lawmaker know that this thing exists. Because if you don't, this is what they see. And this is the pressure that they get because this is what the media sees. The media is not reading Heritage papers. They're not reading AFP policy stuff. They're seeing billboards, they're going to congressmen, or they're going to your state reps, and they're saying, you're not willing to save lives, Representative George. Right? So they're left with, well, I like lives, I like people, I don't like potholes. And now they're stuck having to defend why they need to fill them and why we need to raise taxes. They need to know where these alternative plans are, and it needs to be sort of organized in a way that it's targeted. So that's why I only list 3. Prevailing wage, film subsidies, 21st century jobs. They're easy to tell your lawmaker about. They're easy to explain. They're easy to find information on. And they're not easy for them to defend when you tell them about it. Because what is more important? Transformers 4 and Oz, or fixing the pothole in the road that you are saying kills people? That's why it's important to take action. We started petitions. We actually had these huge postcards that we wanted to do. A lot of times it's a creative way to get, a lot of times when you're doing activism stuff, you need to get a creative way to get media attention. So I had this idea that we would do just gigantic postcards and then ask Governor Snyder and Speaker Bolger and then Senate Majority Leader Randy Richardville to come out and accept them. And we had 3 of them. We had people sign all 3, and then we had those filled up in about 2 weeks, so we ordered more. So back at the office, and I couldn't bring them, there's like literally no room, and we didn't order any more yet, because this is the last talk that I had given. We want to ask them, when this starts to heat up, because Medicaid expansion is sort of the #1 issue right now, trying to get road funding in the news is going to be impossible. But there will be a time when that happens, and what we want to do is hold a press conference and ask them to come out and accept it, get a hit in MLive or the Detroit News, the Free Press, so that people know there are alternatives to it. And that's kind of what we're doing. So that's where the nomitaxhike.com comes from. If you're on and active on social media, at the bottom here is this Fix the Roads hashtag. And I can explain social media if you want me to come back to your group. I know Bill's actually pretty good at it. Use the Fix the Roads hashtag. It's what the lobby groups use to promote it. They're asking people to take pictures of potholes and say, oh, just fix the roads. Because it sounds great. Everybody in this room, who wants to fix the roads? Everybody in the room wants to fix the roads, right? Everybody likes to help poor people in need. We're not different from the left in that respect. We just have different ways of doing it. But the left always comes out first, and they have this, we help poor people. So that's where we struggle, is getting out the narrative. Use that and say, fix the roads by prioritizing spending, eliminate subsidies. That's one heck of a way to sort of get on the conversation with them and let people know about that. So if you're on it, use that. If not, send a postcard, give your representative a call or an email. If you haven't done any of these are all good items, and there's not one that's more effective than the other, but they all are effective together, so use them all. I think that's it there. Yeah, so any questions on roads before I go into just a quick recap on Medicaid expansion then? Yeah. There's waste. So I'm sure you can see that a lot of the education is, you have different amounts of money, and then you always want to know how much is enough, because every year they want more to help the kids, more to help them learn, and everyone in the room thinks education's important, right? So it's hard to say we want to cut the budgets. But I don't specifically have an answer for where does it all go, other than benefits, compensation costs, and I think it was in Michigan CapCon, what was his representative? Representative Rutledge, and I can't remember which district he's in. I think the Detroit area, had said that it just isn't enough. It isn't enough money. We should have more going into education, and that's exactly how they're going to sell the road tax hike. That's my feeling, is that they're going to have to do that. It's going to be almost impossible to just raise your gas taxes without doing something with that sales tax and then selling you an additional hike for kids. Because there's enough people that will go, all right, fine. You can just see it happening already, because even you were like, well, I mean, I can see why education's important. So other than that, the lottery money, it's huge. They actually got a big windfall from sales tax. The education lobby's gotten a ton because it's a 2% of growth. Well, anytime that grows, that number grows a lot. So they've gotten a lot more extra money. But again, you have charter schools that come in with $2,000 less per student with better scores. Now, not all of them are the case, right? But a charter school that doesn't perform goes away. And that's a good thing, whereas public education keeps the bad teachers and promotes them and pays them more because they've been there longer. Now, not that all public schools are bad, but they're definitely not as competitive as they could be. And just additionally adding in charter schools to the mix makes them more competitive and more accountable to their dollars. But again, the sales tax is like $1 billion of it. I mean, if they really, really want to fix it, that's one way to kind of do it. Any other questions on that? Yeah.
Terry, can you use the microphone? What we're going to do here, just real quick,
Yeah.
everybody needs to use a microphone.
Got it.
This is being recorded, and the people who are watching the recording won't understand the answer
Sure,
unless
sure.
they hear the question. So,
Try again? Okay. Greg, where does the governor, in his infinite wisdom, who sounds to me like he's kind of sold his soul, where does he think the average household like mine with 3 to 4 registered vehicles is going to be able to come up with the kind of money we're going to have to come up with to just simply renew our registrations? Does he even care? I mean, is that what we're supposed to ask our legislators? Do you care, sir?
Sure, I would ask him that.
How can people who are, with the unemployment rate that we have, looking for jobs, trying to put gas in their tanks to do it, and then having to spend all these hundreds of more dollars on registrations?
That's why I think it's going to be a hard sell, and that's why the initial 60 to 80% hike was just, like, it went nowhere, and it went nowhere fast. That's why I think the initial point, Governor Snyder is not dumb. He is very tactical. He says he's not a politician, but he's pretty good at being one, and I think the initial thing was to do one of those, like, shock and awe things, like, we need $1.4 billion, let's just raise taxes here, here, and here, and nobody likes it. But now everybody thinks roads are a problem. So it did get the discussion going. So hats off to the man for knowing how to do that. But I don't know where he expects the money to come from. The registration, he would say, well, it's only 20%, right? But that's a lot of money. I've talked to people before, even for me. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. A 20% hike on like a $100 registration fee. It's not chump change. And I was out, when we were doing the Right to Work lobby day, I had a union guy say that, you know, something about, oh, $100 really wasn't that big a deal. This is the nicest guy I've ever met, though, by the way, so I'm going to make it sound really bad, but very nice. And he actually is very conservative outside of pro-right to work. I mean, you ask him anything else, he would agree with you in this room. And he said, the $100 really isn't that big a deal, and so I just asked him for it. I was like, well, I'll take it. And all of a sudden it became a big deal. Oh, well, no. I'm like, I could use $100. I was like, that's two full tanks of gas at $3.60 a gallon, or that's several meals, or if they say that's 100, you know, McDoubles at McDonald's, right? That's a lot of movie tickets too. I could put that into the economy, but all of a sudden he was like, well, okay, fine. So it is a lot. I think Governor Snyder's thing is on the big scope. The economy will benefit from an investment in infrastructure. But the economy would benefit from an investment in infrastructure and the elimination of these programs because it's not being wasted. So I think it was Hayek is one of the major economists, and he says that, you know, the higher up in knowledge you go, the less that's there. Knowledge is best solved down here, right? All problems are most likely solved. That's why they say local level government is best, and then as you go up, it should be limited. It's exactly that. So you have government officials who are picking winners and losers in terms of whether it be a worker with prevailing wage laws or companies that they deem are going to make the economy better in Michigan. Well, this is absurd. If they're going to, we're going to purchase their stuff anyway, voluntarily. So I don't know where he expects to get it. I think he's just out to solve a problem and say, I've been fixing the roads. And
Hi, my name's Tim. Thanks for explaining all this to us.
Sure.
When you first started, you showed 2 ways that they were trying to get more tax money. One was the gas,
Yep.
and the other one was the sales
sales tax, yep.
Sales tax,
Yep.
okay? So if those are the 2 options, neither one are good, okay, and they get on a ballot, you really don't have the choice. You know,
Right.
You have no choice.
Right.
So if that's the way it's going to turn out, what can we do about it?
That's why I think the best thing is to target certain programs because, so after I give all these talks, there we go. So conservatives like to do, I like to call it the research report because everybody here is just like, what is the real solution to solve roads, right? Like, why isn't Greg showing us exactly how we can fund roads and make it permanent forever, Like, we don't have to do this talk again. Like, how can we fix healthcare forever? So then we all go out and do research. We read our heritage papers, we read the Cato papers, and we read all these other things. And we cite the report. We've got footnotes. And by the time we are done doing that, and we're getting ready to get in our car to go drop it off to our lawmaker, we're paying higher gas taxes because we're not organized enough like the left and targeted enough, because there are so many different programs. Remember the circle I had? It was just partial list of things that could be eliminated. And we all have our favorites, and we're all like, let's eliminate this program. And if they hear from everybody that the film subsidies are a bad idea, they've got to at some point address it. The House voted a budget, passed it without it in there. And that's why I think if you target it enough. The House passed the budget, no film subsidies. The Senate, who are kind of champions of it, and Richardville moved it back up to 50, and then they put it into a conference committee and passed it with the $50 million again. Governor Snyder himself dropped it in his own budget to 25. So even if it only is 25, well, it's $25 million. It didn't get wasted. It can go into roads. So there are enough people there, I think, you can convince them to eliminate program at a time. And if you refuse to if you're all calling in to your lawmaker, Senator Pavlov, why aren't you getting rid of film subsidies? He's like, actually, I'm in favor of getting rid of film subsidies. Great, great. Then he gets 10 more calls. Like, he's probably going to be okay with a bill that comes up, and there's a bill in the House to eliminate film subsidies. But you have to do it and target them. So as a group, maybe decide which ones you want to go after. I've been saying those three everywhere, all across the state. So like every group that I've spoke to, those are the top 3 items that I've said. And I think if you get enough people to call in, you can eliminate them, at least discussion-wise. It takes time, and that's, we like a republic government for a reason. It's slow. It's supposed to be slow, and that's what helps us. So the summer break is a huge thing. I actually thought that halfway through May they were going to pass the gas tax, and I would have had to call these other groups and say, we can come talk about something else if you want. Because I actually thought they were going to raise the taxes, and they didn't, because we didn't get lucky, but the gas went up. And it was harder to talk about raising gas taxes, so it was a pivot into Medicaid expansion. So I think if you're tactical and pick something that is easy to eliminate, that should be eliminated, and say it is unacceptable to have this program, and then also tell me people are dying. Somebody's wrong, and if they're not going to go, well, oh yeah, we were just kidding, people aren't really dying. They're going to, so you then own the discussion. I think it's very hard to defend a program that is killing people, in my opinion. So that's how the left looks at things. I mean, that's sort of what they do. They'll make it very personal right away, and then make you say, and if we just say it just costs too much, it just costs too much, we lose. So in this case, we have the upper hand. I mean, they like handed us the crappiest slogan to fix the roads of all time. And we can sort of capitalize on that. At least that's what I'm hoping for. But the House sort of listened, and they passed it without it. So I think there's a lot of momentum to do that.
This may sound crazy or whatever, but I'd like to know who, I've always wondered, who or how, let's just say the state of Michigan. Every single person in here has a vehicle. Every year they buy license plates. And they also pay for licenses. And we pay sales tax on gas to move them. And we pay for insurance and all of that. Who knows how much does Michigan take in from all this revenue?
Well, the gas tax and the registration fees amount to that $2.2
I mean, we're even
billion.
talking about watercraft.
Oh yeah, yeah. Those are all registration
Cigarette
fees, and
taxes.
some of them will go into different funds. But like the total transportation budget, and obviously not all of that even goes to fixing potholes, and not all of the $1.4 billion proposed is going to go to fixing the potholes. It's going to go into the transportation fund. The transportation fund then divvies it out into, bike paths,
But who has
mass
the total?
transit.
Who has the total figure for the state of Michigan?
The total figure is that $2.2 billion. The total budget itself is almost $49 billion. The governor's proposal with the expansion of Medicaid and the gas tax hike would be, I think it's 50, basically 50 billion. So we also compete with states that don't have income taxes, and they seem to be able to fund roads and other programs without them. So we're making ourselves uncompetitive is basically what happens. So the total amount of money that goes into specific programs, I'd have to go look through the budget. I don't know off the top of my head how much we spend on watercraft registration and where it goes, and I don't know.
Somebody has to control it.
Oh, sure,
Somebody's
yeah.
somebody's
It goes
gotta
into the
figure-
appropriations bills, and then it gets voted on, and typically it's the same amount from last year unless for some reason they want to move it around into something else. So like Governor Snyder's now proposing to do something for young kids to go to the dentist. So somewhere that money came from, it got moved around, and now it's going into that. But a lot of it is tough to look at the appropriation bill because there's two. They call it the omnibus and the school bus. The education bills are separate. Those are all listed in line items. But it's like it goes into this fund, and it's this particular amount of money. So then you have to FOIA to find out where it goes. And the FOIA costs money, and it takes time.
Who determines that?
What's that?
Who determines that?
Determines where the money goes? The
Yeah.
appropriations committees do. So they'll go into Transportation Appropriations Committee, a school appropriations budget. They'll go into a Department of Community Health. They'll do one on prisons and stuff like that, and they'll all have different budgets, and their committee comes up with where the money goes. And then it goes and it's voted on through the Appropriations Committee, then it goes to the main floor, and then that budget then goes to the Senate, and they match them up with theirs, and then they have to confer together. So there's people that they know, but it's just, the appropriations chairs know a lot. Senator Khan was an appropriations chair. He knows a ton. But each group sort of votes on it. So the Transportation Appropriations Committee has its own subcommittee, and it's complicated. But
It sure
it's
is
mainly because they got a lot
complicated.
of money and they're wasting it. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So just as you're summarizing it, the three things again were the film subsidy,
Yep. Film subsidies are $50 million a year.
okay, and what was the other two again?
The 21st Century Jobs
Yep.
Fund, which is $75 million,
Okay,
and then the prevailing wage laws, so the state version.
very good.
We're able to impact state prevailing wage.
Are these available, or this presentation available on the Americans for
Yeah, I can
Prosperity
actually
site?
send this. I can send this to anybody here that wants it.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah, I have a couple articles that are on the website. If you go to the taxes section, you can pull up basically those things that I write about. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Cool. Anything else?
I think that's probably it.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Oh, did you guys have questions on Medicaid expansion? I forgot all about that. Okay, yeah, I figured that's
Okay.
okay.
I guess we're going to do that then. Okay, come right up. Who's
Let me
got
just
their
go
question?
through.
Okay.
So, have you guys been following it at all? I mean, pretty familiar. If we're to do MDOT, are you good or fair on Medicaid expansion? Pretty much. Okay. So the governor's pushing a proposal that would reform and expand Medicaid in Michigan, and he wants to essentially, it's House Bill 4714. The House has already passed it, and it has some reforms in it. But essentially, what it does, it expands it open to people who are now eligible under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, up to 133% of the poverty line. So Medicaid is supposed to take care of what? Children and the very poor, and it does that. Not necessarily the greatest way to like provide coverage for these people, but the intention is to cover the children and the poor. And Governor Snyder now is going around saying that people are dying in the ER. Everyone in this room is particularly unpatriotic. Even those of you that have served in the military are being called extremists. And it's sad when you have like a conservative governor doing this, and it's actually personally offensive to me. My grandpa was also in the military. He's a activist and donor to AFP, and not a big donor by any means, but believes in the free market and believes in limited government and spends money from Social Security to push this for me and my brother and my future kids, years from now. So when the governor's coming out and saying that these people are unpatriotic, he just doesn't know who you are. And that's his own fault. Right? He's calling everybody in the room basically unpatriotic because you're letting people die in the ER. How many of you donate to charities? I mean, and this is absurd. He does not know who you are, and you need to let him know that it's unacceptable to be called these things. But outside of that, Medicaid is broken. It is unaffordable. Those are our two big things. And you have to move it away from just being about cost. It is about cost, but to win the argument, you can't just continuously say it's going to cost too much money. Because I can easily come back and say, so that particular person's life isn't worth it, right? So you lose immediately. It is going to cost. I think it's going to add, Medicaid expansion is going to add additional costs of about $19 billion just for Michigan over 10 years. I think it's $800 billion over 10 years nationwide. And none of that's paid for. All of it's borrowed. All of it. Now, Snyder is saying that initially it's going to save money. I mean, he could use the same slogan for roads on Medicaid expansion. It's going to save money and it's going to save lives at the same time, because the Medicaid expansion is going to, for the first 3 years through 2017, it's going to cover the federal government, aka you still, will be paying for it up to 100% of the cost. So that's really what they're doing, is they're enticing states to expand it by saying that it's free. It's not coming out of it. So what they mean by that is it's not coming out of the state budget. The federal government's going to find money for it. Well, where is it going to find it? It's going to borrow it, and it's going to expand it. So up through 2017, it's going to be the 100% level, the 100% funding level from the federal government. From 2017 to, I think it's 2022, it falls somewhere between 100 and 90%. So the state will pick up the additional amount of money. And then after 2022, it drops to the 90% level. And the federal government guarantees that it'll be paid at the 90% level forever. Yeah.
My question is, I know that the federal government is subsidizing this thing to start with.
Yeah.
But nobody has said how much it's going to cost after this first 2 or 3 years. And nobody, I don't think, could really know, because you're going to add in all these people that you haven't had before on the program, and they're all going to use it. And so after 3 years or so, and even if it goes down 10% to 20%, eventually it's going to be down to the states paying it all.
Right.
And then where are we getting the money?
Right. So part of the House bill, let me explain it a little further, because how many of you are familiar with Mike Shirkey, Representative Shirkey? He's one of the champions behind right to work. So him and Kolbeck were sort of like the champions behind right to work. Overall, pro-free market, limited government guy, and he is pushing Medicaid expansion. And it is mind-blowing. I don't really get it, other than Bolger's terming out, and I see him possibly running for speaker. So it's a political decision. That's not outside the realm of what politicians think of. They have reforms in HB 4714 that will supposedly help with cost. They want to put a time limit on it. So they're asking for the federal government to give them a waiver to put a time limit or a cap on the recipients of Medicaid for those that are of like working ability, not the disabled, not the kids, not pregnant women. So there's not a time limit on those for kids or whatever. Kids are covered. It's like 200% of the poverty level up to 19. Now Obamacare covers them if they're on their kids up to 26. So Medicaid covers them to 19 even if they have nothing. So those reforms are all still a ruse, because you're going to get a waiver, but the bill allows them to expand it before the waivers are approved. So at the end of that, though, if by I think it's December 31st of 2015, if the Health and Human Services, HHS, and Sebelius have not approved the waiver for Michigan, supposedly then we can say, we're done. We're not going to fund it anymore. Well, what are the chances? Arizona voluntarily did this back in 2002, I think. They expanded Medicaid. Maine just did it. It came in over cost of what they thought, and they're having a hard time freezing the program. They couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't stop the expansion. They had to freeze new people getting on it. But it's like any other welfare entitlement program. It doesn't go away once you do it. So the problem then is we're not going to be able to just all of a sudden go back to the way it was 10 years later. That's just not going to happen. And we can't also rely on the federal government, who cannot even balance a budget, to pay for it. They're forecasting it out. Governor Snyder gets up and he's like, man, I'd love to be governor in like 2038 or something stupid. I mean, he gets up there and he's like, whoever's governor in 2038 is going to get it made. You come in, you don't do anything. Who can seriously forecast the economy into 2038? Nobody. Nobody. Businesses don't even go out that far. They can try, but some businesses won't even be around in 2038. You'd usually do a 5-year forecast or something like that. I mean, I've not run a business, but I've worked for several, and it's just impossible to do that, especially with the amount of debt you have. And we're part of a global economy. So it just depends on what's going on. So there are some reforms in it. The cap at 48 months. Then after that, they have it so that if you are above 100%, it's really complicated. So this is why they want to get it done right away, because people in this room are going to learn it, and they're going to refuse to want to expand it. From 100% to 133%, Obamacare provides health insurance subsidies to purchase in the private market. So really what the expansion is talking about is anywhere from like 50 to 100%. There are probably ways to get affordable care to them without going along with Obamacare. And it can be done if you wanted to expand state government. But the expansion they're talking about would be the largest expansion of state government since the income tax in like 1968 or 67. So it's huge. I mean, a $20 billion hike in supposed new revenue and taxes. I mean, where does this new revenue come from? It's going to come from probably tax hikes somehow. That's usually what happens. Maine had this voluntarily expanded. They're having issues with it. And also, if you look at some of the studies, people aren't necessarily better off on Medicaid as opposed to the ER. So, I mean, what does that say for the system? We actually care about poor people, right? Because we're not willing to expand it and put them on this, right? Because there are better health care outcomes with private insurance. We would prefer people had private health insurance, and that's what we want to get them. And not expanding, you have to just sort of remember to craft the argument as, well, I do care. That's why I don't want to expand it. And then we just have to hope the Senate doesn't pick it up, because I think they have the votes. The only reason I think that it didn't pass before they left for break was because of the Hassert rule. The Republican caucus made basically a pact not to pass any legislation out of the caucus that at least half the members didn't agree on. And I don't think they had enough of the members in the Republican Party to get it out of the caucus, but I'm certain they had enough votes with Democrat support once it went to the floor, which is why Snyder flew back from Israel, and they kept pushing Majority Leader Richard Ville to pull it out anyway and vote on it. That's what they keep saying. Go on a vote, not a vacation, and people deserve to have a vote on it.
Yes, Greg, just a couple things.
Yeah.
First off, for everybody, they came out today and they said that they are now not going to enforce the employer mandate for Obamacare until 2050.
Yep, I just saw that. Yep.
Again, such a successful program,
Right.
They can't even get this thing off the ground. They had to delay it another year. But it's my understanding that everybody who would qualify under Medicaid would also qualify under the new federal exchanges that are going to be set up. They would qualify for a subsidized or a reduced rate policy on the exchange. Is that
Up if they're 100% or above.
yeah, from
of the federal poverty
100%
level.
to the 133? Because
Right.
at the poverty below, those people are already getting Medicare. Is that or Medicaid? Is that correct?
So Medicaid is covering pretty much excluding pregnant women, children, and disabled adults and disabled kids. So basically people like me who are able to work, who are poor or something, they are eligible, I think it's up to like 50% of the poverty line. So there is a gap between 50 to 100. But in theory, if you had an economy that was moving, you wouldn't need to provide the insurance. And a lot of those are younger people too. They're working age or they're adults, but they're typically healthy. And they aren't buying insurance, or they're not on it, or they're on their parents or something. So there are some that are left out and probably in a gap.
Is that what they call the woodwork? Because I've heard several folks talk about the woodwork.
The woodwork effect is those that didn't recently, they qualify for Medicaid, but haven't come out of the woodwork to collect the benefit. And there are people that do, they just haven't done it. And most of that's because they're healthy and they haven't had an incident to go get insurance. So when they do have like a health incident, they go to the hospital or whatever, they're going to find out they qualify for Medicaid, they get signed up. Well, these people would already qualify in the first place. Another ironic thing, too, is that Governor Snyder is going around on a tour and he's showing people that have benefited from Medicaid. Pre-expansion. It's like, I mean, it sounds, don't think of me as heartless, but there was a woman that was up there who was qualified for, she was a business owner, couldn't afford insurance, qualified for Medicaid, and got breast cancer, survived breast cancer. But like, she qualified and did all that on the current system that we already have in place to take care of the people that need it. And he's saying that we need to cover these other people at a huge cost, and then also assist in implementing one of the worst bills ever passed in the history of mankind, and that would be Obamacare. Healthcare exchanges and the Medicaid expansion are like the two pillars of that system. It is what makes it work. Michigan has refused to do state-based exchanges or private exchanges, and now we're debating whether to assist in the other part. So it's hard for me to believe that a Republican lawmaker who opposes Obamacare can then get up on the other side and say, we have to do this. We have to expand Medicaid. Because really what we want to do is it's going to be a painful, painful implementation. As Bill said, they've already delayed the employer mandate another year. And that just shows, and that's not just one incident like recently. This is one more example of someone saying this is not going to go over as smoothly as we thought. What we can hope for is the bill itself is not going to be repealed if Obama is president. We can count that out. It's not going to happen. But what could happen is he is a politician. He does react to certain things. The House and the Senate will react to opinions, and we could get really, really good amendments in there that would assist in making that less painful. And that's exactly what Jack McHugh has been saying from the Mackinac Center and what AFP is hoping for. We're pushing full repeal, always. But until that happens, we might as well get some really good reforms out of the one bill that's there. There are a lot of things that didn't go in initially. There was no trading across state lines. There was no official tort reform out of it. And now we're expanding broken systems after broken systems and then saying it's to help people. I mean, it's just a joke. So really, go ahead.
One other thing that I had was, I understand that part of the thing for expanding Medicare and helping poor people is job training. Do you know how much money of that, that they're going to put for job training? Because to me, what they do here at the clinic and what they do, that just, I don't see, that's something other than Medicaid. I just don't understand how that's in there.
I don't really either. I think I forget if it was governors, I think it was for block granting. If you have to Google this and go back, but I'm pretty sure Snyder was the only governor that didn't sign on to a letter with the Republican Governors Association to request block grants from the federal government. Every other governor who was a Republican has requested block grants to reform it. And that's really the major reform. If you want to reform Medicaid, you request block grants. And it sounds like, and you say block grants, people are like, oh, you're just going to kill people. Oh, vouchers, you don't like kids. It's really a way to make states compete against one another, and it's a way for us to be in control of the money. That's exactly what it would be. Money would come back without the strings tied. We need more flexibility. So if you are going to call and take action, demand more flexibility out of it. Don't expand a system that is failing and that is completely unaffordable, basically. So that, and then the main way to get that is to ask for block grants. And if we can't get it stopped, the Mackinac Center put an article out that said there should be an amendment in the bill that says you can't expand until you have the waivers from the federal government, because you can just see this happening where in 2015 they're like, nope, sorry, and then we've already expanded a program, now we're on the hook to pay for it. Good luck. I mean, good luck, right? And then what kind of care are you going to get from a system that doesn't reimburse doctors as much money as a private health insurance does, and doctors, I think 1 in 4 are saying, yeah, I'm not taking Medicaid patients. So you can say we're going to expand it all you want, but if doctors don't take them, they're left with less doctors providing more care. How is the care going to be? You'd be better off still going to the ER, which is what they will probably do. So, the very, very poor are being cared for. The kids are being cared for. Like the governor has come out and saying, well, kids are just, no, they're being paid for up till 19 years old. Like no kid is without insurance. I remember going to school and getting information in public school, like here's health insurance if you don't have it. And it was Medicaid for kids. Like we do take care of them. We do. We do take care of the poor. Part of the expansion is because there have been cuts to Medicare and move money over to that. So a lot of it is just, it's unacceptable to expand this program that you can't pay for in the first place, that doesn't provide great health benefits to people. We deserve better. And by holding out, if we can get them to not vote on this thing, the longer it takes to vote, the harder it's going to be because the closer it is to their election term. And they are not going to want to pass something with it fresh in the minds of voters. So that's why they want to do it right away. Right away. Like if we can pass tax hikes on roads, you'll forget about it and forgive them. If you'll pass Medicaid expansion, you'll forget about it and forgive them. And oh, we passed right to work, so it's a free pass. Implementing Obamacare or right to work? I know which one is bigger for me, right? Right to work's huge. I mean, we should be making people competitive. Part of healthcare would be getting people a job, having a good, strong economy. So if you provide an economic environment where people can do that, then you won't have to worry about expanding welfare.
I got a question here. If Congress refuses to fund Obamacare, isn't that another way of getting rid of it?
Yeah, I mean, if they can't fund it, they can't do anything with it.
That's kinda what's
Everything has to be appropriated.
That's
So.
kind of what's going on right now. They're running around begging for money.
Oh yeah, well they're going to end up getting it through appropriations and stuff like that. They can try not to fund it. Chances are it'll have to be funded, but they're not passing budgets for us to even know. So we don't know. They're not really following the rules, which is not a surprise. It's what the government does at the federal level. But the state level, they have to pass budgets. They have to be balanced. So here, like for example, Common Core is not funded. It's still enacted in Michigan. It's been adopted by the Board of Education, but the legislature defunded it for this new appropriations year. So they will not be putting money into expanding Common Core. So that can happen. But the problem with Obamacare is it's federal, and we can only hope not to do anything with Medicaid expansion at the state level. That's why it's optional. That's why the Supreme Court said that you couldn't take away all Medicaid funding at the state level, because that's what they tried to do. Part of it was you were forced to expand Medicaid. If you weren't familiar with this, the Supreme Court, you had the individual mandate ruling, which we all know failed, and now it's a tax and stuff like that. But there was the other one that was a win, and that was the thing that gave states the option or not to expand, because originally the ACA said you had to expand Medicaid up to the 133 level, or you lose all funding for Medicaid. And the Supreme Court said that that's not nudging. That's, I forget what, a political something, babooning or something, I don't remember what it was, but it was something weird, and they said you couldn't do that. They can nudge, they can say you can lose 5% of your funding, but they're not allowed to just take it all away. And that's where it was a win, that's why it's optional, that's why it's so weird that you have Republican governors and lawmakers pushing for an expansion of a bill that they despised at any other time before it.
All right. Well, we're running out of time, but in closing, okay, let me just ask this real quick, and then we'll do one more. But I'm talking to my friends and relatives who are thinking that Obamacare is a great plan, and why would anybody get in the way of this great plan? And the people who are voting against it are called obstructionists. And every idea that comes along, all they have is a no. And why do they always say no? Why can't they come up with some alternative? And I don't have an excellent answer for that as far as are there any bills that have been presented that have an alternative? I know we're talking about giving our senators some training by sending them to this event, and it's specifically to train them on alternative health care to government-run programs. Can you just give us a super quick answer on what those alternatives are? Because otherwise it's just a big fat no, and people don't like that. They do call you heartless.
Right. So there are other alternatives. It depends on how free market you want to go and how your friend's willing to hear you. You could privatize everything, but really probably the argument that you're going to make is allowing them to have control over it. And what does that mean? Well, that's a health savings account at some point. That's going to have to be what it is, because I know Indiana has their Healthy Indiana plan. It provides health savings accounts, and people freak out whenever you say that, but basically they wouldn't disagree that people should have more control over it. But then when you offer the suggestion, they're like, oh, George Bush talked about health savings accounts. I don't know about that. So they've got, you have to get them to agree with you first. And so when you're talking to them, you have to get them something like, well, I think everybody should have more control over their health insurance, don't you? Yeah, of course. Obamacare doesn't do that. Obamacare does not do that. It expands a government system where the money isn't theirs. It's not given to them. So, I mean, this isn't an AFP position, but for example, with education, some would argue that it is so important we should fund it, but it doesn't mean that the government has to run it. So you can get a lot, I mean, none of us in this room would say that people should go without health insurance. And actually, it's like poll tested that like that is one way you do not want to go. People believe, on the average, I was talking to the deputy director, Annie, on the way over here, and I was like, you need to give me a quick rundown on that Medicaid expansion. So all I've been doing is road taxes and like reading some articles on Medicaid. She's like, okay, well, I just got a new poll. And I was like, okay. So she said that people, they basically overwhelmingly support the government should be sort of providing this. So this is why we're losing in the first place. So it's hard to sit there and teach them free market economics in about 30 seconds. I mean, you just can't do it. But you can get them to say, well, they should be in more control, they should have flexibility, they should have some skin in the game with co-pays and health savings accounts because that dictates better behavior when you own something. And no one really disagrees with those things. But as far as talking to people about providing the insurance, our side has done a crappy job at doing nothing but saying no. And they don't have an alternative. And a lot of it is free, being able to trade across the state lines would be a good example. Did you know that you can't buy health insurance in Indiana? You have to buy it from Michigan. Why? You can buy auto insurance from E-Trade, and I don't think that's based in Michigan. And you can buy it from Allstate, from the dude who used to be on, 24 in season 1. So, I mean, as the president, you can buy it from these other companies out of state. Can you imagine if you had to buy AAA of Michigan only, or Allstate of Michigan only? I mean, no, you buy it from a company who's able to compete across the country. So that's one reason. Health savings accounts provide you to put some skin in the game, and it's something that younger people like me extremely benefit from because we're able to tax-free put them into an account and save it, and then use it later and add to it every year. So health savings accounts are an easy one, I think, but you're right. I mean, we were talking about that at AFP the other day. I was like, what are we suggesting as an alternative? And you have to go read huge papers to find out, and then it's every single think tank has a different idea. Because some free market think tanks are like, that's too government run. So you do eventually have to compromise on something, and it's probably not going to be privatize the entire system and everybody pays for their own way. That's probably not going to happen. You're also not going to convince anybody with it.
Okay.
If that helps at all. But yeah, we do a really bad job.
That's good. That's good.
I could never understand going back to Hillary when she was pushing this health thing, which I think Obama picked up on and just modified what she was pushing. But what I could not understand is they were saying how bad our hospitalization was. I'd like to know what country is better than us.
Me too.
You know,
Where was you?
I don't know who it is. Who are we racing with?
Well, we're also taking statistics. When they compare statistics globally, you're taking other government statistics and comparing them to ours and hoping that they measure them the same way. Well, it's unlikely, right? It's unlikely. Some countries don't count like certain things with like infants, like when babies die. Some of them don't count them, so like they're infanticide like figures lower because they don't count it as a death the same time we do. So we're comparing statistics that aren't really of equal footing. I mean, where's the president get his health care? Here. He doesn't go to another country. Where do all of the officials go get their care? Here. If it was better elsewhere, the people making $200,000 a year would be going to another country to get it. So you know what people want because of where they get their care, where they stay. So it's just a joke to think that we don't have incredible care. Do we have some bad ones? Yeah. Does someone lose their foot and get amputated the wrong way like the president says? I'm sure it happens. But it's so rare, and you have to almost statistically look at how rare that stuff is. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they keep saying that we don't have really good care. It's just a matter of how the government rates us compared to other governments who have other care. And we have larger population. We have a lot more diversity in terms of some of them. So some of them have a lot more homogeneous species over there, where it's like they have less diversity of people. So it's just, I don't know. I don't specifically know, but I know that I would get my health care here. It's not bad. It's like we have worse, really good health care or something. So I don't know specifically, but yeah. I don't usually trust those stats, by the way. I mean, macroeconomics is a little funky to me, so. Anything else? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for your time as well, the great patriots that you are. We're going to close with prayer, and so if you'll stand and join me. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this opportunity to gain information, and Lord, I pray that you would help us to use wisdom as we navigate through these issues, and that we would be wise in our interpretation and our communication with the people around us, that we would be sensitive to their needs and understand that those without knowledge are just seeking, and that we would be lights in a dark world. And I pray, Father, that you would protect us and guide us as we go, and that you would bring us back safely next month. In Jesus' name, amen. And next month will be the first Tuesday of August.